Hey guys, Eden's Living TV 2.0 to you. It's been a while since I've podcasted, and I brought back one of the gurus here, Dr. Radley Ramdhan. He's really a consultant for the Eden's Living TV show, and he is a specialist in post-traumatic stress, naturopathic doctor, does acupuncture, and we're going to be talking about emotional well-being. So welcome, Dr. Radley. We're going to be sharing a little bit from his book. Shout out. Very proud of you, Radley. Great content. I've been reading it. So welcome to Eden's Living TV.
Thank you, Suzanne. And it's always a pleasure being on your show. Always a lot to learn from you. And I'm always grateful for the opportunity to be on your show. So again, my name is Dr. Radley Ramdhan. And thank you again for that great introduction, Suzanne, and today's topic is emotional health and well-being.
I love it. You know, people don't understand that when you have post-traumatic stress, I know I struggle with this. I had a car wreck. Emotional regulation is everything in your emotional health, because that is your health. Let's talk about how the emotional is the root of all disease, in my opinion.
So we're going to start with talking about what is emotional health. So I'm going to ask you the question, Suzanne, what is emotional health to you?
I think emotional health is being able to regulate and to react instead of respond, and have a positive mental mindset, just outlook.
So I would say yes or no up until the point that you said react versus respond, because react, it's more of an automatic thing. Respond is more of a controlled aspect. So
and that's where I would get.
Yeah, that is what I would say in terms of changing the definition. So the way that I define emotional health, or the way that I look at emotional health, is basically in short terms, it's the stability of emotions and the maturity of our feelings. So basically that is understanding our emotions, understanding our feelings, and being able to express them in a healthy manner. So emotions and feelings, there's overlap between both of them. So emotion comes from our thoughts as a response to external stimuli, versus feeling comes more from a reaction to the actual emotion itself. Emotions are inborn and common to all of us, versus feelings are more personal and vary with each individual. And then emotion is more of an automatic response, versus feelings, it's more shaped with individuals' temperament and experiences. So as we go through life, we encounter different situations, and it shapes the way that we would feel about certain things. So for example, both of us might be driving in the car together, right? And a song comes on, but the feeling that you might exhibit towards that sound would be something completely different from what I experienced, because of some type of past experience. You might really enjoy the song, and I might be like, I hate the song because I've had bad experiences with the song. So there's still an emotion evoked with it, but there's also that feeling attached to it. And that's just one example of it, but it could go in even deeper than that and beyond that aspect of it as well.
You know, I think I really like that aspect that you tied the emotions and the memories.
So
that's key.
With that being said, the next thing I want to bring in is the science of emotions, tapping into understanding a little bit more of the limbic system itself. So we have the amygdala, right? It's basically there helps with perception of the emotion, stores emotion for emotional response, and it's a big part of our fight or flight response. So basically, in terms of storing emotional for emotional response, it's basically something happens to us. We join that emotion to whatever memory it is, and we have it sort of like as a safety net for later on. So when something happens, it triggers that emotional response in terms of, should I feel angry about this? So just like we're driving in the car, your emotion might have been one of joy, and I might have been angry. And that might have been because of the stored memory that we have associated with that song. So again, there's that aspect of it with the amygdala. Then there's a hypothalamus.
Let me ask you this. Let me interrupt. I always ask, because I do know there's different parts of the brain, the hippocampus, the amygdala. Isn't the amygdala like kind of like the central processing unit of everything? And it stores every memory, every sight, every smell, every experience. So I know I want to talk about too, when you break these down, how trauma gets stuck in the amygdala.
Okay.
So let's break it down the parts and let's talk about how traumas affect each part.
Okay. So as we go along, I'm going to break down a little bit more about different parts of the limbic system. So again, the hypothalamus, responsible for maintaining homeostasis, production of the essential hormones, basically converts emotion into physical responses. Then we have the cingulate gyrus, helps to regulate emotions and pain, predicts and avoids negative consequences. So a lot of times there's emotions that are associated with pain, and there's pain that is associated with emotions. So this is part of the brain that sort of helps us understand why that happens. We develop emotions attached with our pain sometimes. So sometimes you see people with chronic pain may struggle with emotions. And then when they start feeling better, it's difficult for them to actually say, yes, I am feeling better, because they develop that emotional connection because of the connection to the cingulate gyrus, where they found that overlap between the pathways that detect and sort of store the memory of the emotion, the memory of the pain. Then
You know,
there's
now I want to interrupt right here if I can and tell you something. I did not even know that that part existed. So you just taught me something. So if we do have a lot, like my car wreck, right? The pain though was the anger of my family of abandoned me. And I did not realize the anger was what was feeding my pain, which was an emotion I could not process or work through the anger.
Exactly. And because of that connection, that is why we have those types of response. So cingulate gyrus, it's one aspect of it. There's different parts of it. It's just one name for a bigger part of it. So sometimes you would hear anterior cingulate gyrus, you would hear things like the cingulate cortex. So there's different names that are sort of associated with it, but for the purpose of this presentation, I use more of like the bigger name or the bigger part of it in terms of the cingulate gyrus. So next part of the limbic system is the thalamus. It's basically like the relay station, right? It collects all the motor and sensory signals that are essential for emotional processing, and then it processes information from each of our senses besides smell. So basically everything we see, hear, taste, or touch passes through, the signal of that passes through the thalamus and allows us to be able to really process that and then associate the response to it. So the sensation of it as well as the motor response of it all passes through the thalamus. Then there's the hippocampus, regulates learning, memories. How does memory organize itself, store itself, and retrieve, all part of the hippocampus. Then it helps in determining appropriate responses. So something happens, a memory pops back up and say, this is an appropriate response for this specific situation. It also helps with processing long-term memories and emotional response. So just like I said, selecting an appropriate response, it's because of that aspect of it. And then there's the basal ganglia, primarily deals with motor control. So motor learning, execute different functions and behaviors as well as emotions. So for example, we in a situation where there's some type of disaster happening, be it natural or man-made, right? And within our body detects fear, and our response would be, all right, we have to run. So part of it would help that connection, utilizing the basal ganglia. We detect fear, our primary motor control would be to run. So we would start stimulating things within the legs, and then that would sort of be able to give that response of being able to move away from whatever danger that we may have perceived as that case. So these are just some parts of the brain. Everything's all related and there's overlap between each one. So you might find like different people talking about, okay, well, this part also is associated with this type of response. They all overlap and they're all interconnected. And the more and more you dig into science, the more and more you realize that it's not always easy to separate the functions between these parts of the brain, because something might be wrong with the amygdala, but the hippocampus sort of compensates because of its connection there. So understanding that aspect of it, that there is overlaps between each part of the brain. They don't function just on their own, as the case might be. So then digging a little bit deeper, we understand the physical part of the brain, right? When things happen, we trigger neurotransmitter formation. So things like hormones and stuff like that are produced within our body, different type of biochemical responses we have. So these are just some of the neurotransmitters that are part of the response within our body. So we have adrenaline, right? It's released by the adrenal gland, which basically sits on top of the kidney. Once adrenaline is released, it increases flow of blood to our muscles. It raises our heart rate, it dilates our pupil. And it's a big part of our fight or flight survival response. The noradrenaline, similar to adrenaline, is released. The release of this chemical could basically allow you to have increased alertness, right? Help us to prime up for various action that we need. So we go into that sense of zooming into something and be like, all right, this is how we have to respond, and give us an opportunity to be able to do that response. It increases.
Yeah, it makes you hyper visual. I know when I get triggered, I become extremely, I can tell you what car tag, what make of car, what color shirt, what hat they were wearing, what type of sunglasses. I'm talking about hyper visual.
Yeah, exactly. So you get that hypervigilance as a result of this noradrenaline. So adrenaline and noradrenaline is also known as epinephrine and norepinephrine. So those are interchangeable terms depending on who you're talking to. They might use one or the other, right? Dopamine, this is sort of like the addictive reward chemical that our brain craves. It serves to motivate us to seek things out that we may need for survival. So sometimes we could find ourselves enslaved by this type of response. We get that dopamine high and we keep craving certain things within our life.
I call it the feel good hormone. You get that rush, you're like, you know, I'm sober 10 years, and I remember the first time I did drugs, that high you get, and then you chase that high. Same thing as eating chocolate.
I think, Suzanne, you just muted yourself.
Somehow it muted.
Yeah,
Is
you
it
go.
unmute now?
You're on mute, yeah. So acetylcholine is our next type of neurotransmitter, right? It's part of the parasympathetic nervous system, and this one actually slows our heart rate, contracts the smooth muscles, dilate blood vessels, and it increases bodily secretion. GABA, which is basically gamma aminobutyric acid, it also regulates communication between the brain cells. It could help us to calm down and reduce the rate of which our neurons fire. Oxytocin is known as the cuddle hormone. So it's released when people get close to us and we are around people more, right? It helps with that strong social bonding aspect of it. And it also helps us with being able to increase our trust with individuals as well. Glutamate is the most abundant neurotransmitter in the vertebrae of the nervous system. It's used by the nerve cells for basically transmitting signals from one cell to the other. And too much of it could actually cause health issues in terms of cognitive impairments. Endorphins, it's triggered by the sensation of pain. It works to inhibit the transmission of pain signals, and it's capable of giving us that sense of euphoria. So there are studies that show that endorphins may also be stimulated by laughter. So from an emotional standpoint, you know, sometimes you hear people say laughter cures a lot of different things, right?
Right.
So this is how it creates that response. Sometimes an individual might be in pain and they go to a comedy show, they together with a group of friends and they laugh and they completely forget their pain exists. Part of it has to do with that response. When we laugh and we go through that emotional joy and enjoyment, that endorphin release actually helps to create that euphoria and helps to basically numb the pain within that given moment in time. And then there's serotonin, right? It's linked to our well-being and happiness. It varies from person to person, and things like exercise and sunlight are two things that could actually help
Yes.
stimulate serotonin. It helps to regulate our mood balance, sleep cycle, and digestion. So sometimes when there's different medication, and we see people struggling with things like depression, you would see different types of medication or different types of herbal medicine that are specific to tapping into these types of neurotransmitter, either blocking them or trying to promote that aspect of it. So understanding that how these neurotransmitters play a part in our emotion is also important. So in Finland, there was a study that was done utilizing 3 cultures or 3 different countries. Off the top of my head, I don't actually remember the number of individuals that was in the study itself, but they utilized 3 different cultures: Finland, Sweden, and Thailand. And they wanted to do it across the 3 countries because these 3 countries would have produced would have different types of cultures basically. And what they tried to study is how does individual respond, or where within their body do they notice a stimulation or they notice deactivation of certain parts of their body when it comes to certain emotions. So in order to take that aspect of it out, saying that only people in Finland would respond this way, or only people in Thailand might respond this way, you give 3 different cultures, Finland, Sweden, and Thailand, cultures that are associated with them, to be able to show that there's sort of like a general pattern of the way that our body sort of maps emotion and presents itself. So what was done is they had each individual to think about the emotion and then map on a body, an image of a body basically, where they felt either stimulated or where they felt like the activation of the body. The hot colors is what they use to represent if things were activated. So say, for example, they say think about joy, right? Then on the image of the body, you had to point out or select on the computer, basically use the hot colors to say, okay, these are the areas that I feel that change in sensation. I feel relaxation in this area, or do I feel like a stimulation in this area? Do I feel muscle contraction? And so cold represents deactivation, hot represents the activation. So basically what the response was this. This was the final presentation of when they mapped it across these 3 different cultures, 3 different countries. They noticed that these were the areas that basically lit up when these different emotions or feelings was basically evoked or thought of in these individuals.
Look at what fear and anger does. It just inflames your brain and your cardiovascular system.
And you could see it where things like happiness and love, right? It stimulates the entire body. It actually activates the entire body. But look at something like depression. You tend to see an individual who's depressed tend to be very closed in. So that shows you, even from that aspect of how people feel things within their body, would make sense as to why somebody who's depressed are always sort of closed in within themselves. Think of somebody who is exhibiting a sense of pride, right? They walk with their chest open. So look at the area that is lit up when you talk about pride, right? Somebody who's angry, they always walk with their chest open and they're ready to fight. So you see that same type of area being expressed with it. So just being able to understand within ourselves where do we feel certain emotions being presented, it's important for us, just by understanding that it could help us, one, be able to control our emotions, but also it could help us to figure out what emotion that our body is exhibiting and sort of give us that opportunity to control it. So we might start developing anger within, something might happen and we might start feeling angry, but instead of having a sudden outburst, we might start noticing, all right, well, our fingers are tensing up. We're starting to form a fist. We're starting to feel that tightness within our chest. And we know that is associated with the way that we respond with anger. Recently, I did a 7-day workshop on emotional health. And one of the things that we had each day was we worked on different emotions. We use a TCM approach to it, and we talked about 5 emotions. And each day when we talk about emotion, we would ask the individual to reflect on, when you feel angry, where do you feel tension in your body? Where do you feel changes? What type of changes do you feel? And this is a one way, once we start becoming more and more aware of where we feel certain tension or relaxation with an emotion, we could be able to detect within ourselves, all right, well, we forming fear within our body, or anger is forming within our body. So we're able to utilize that to say, all right, well, I notice the tension and is building up in my hand, the fist is tightening, and that is a part of anger. So do I want to act out and punch somebody, or do I want to be able to control myself? So having
Right.
that mindfulness gives you an opportunity there to sort of prevent yourself from expressing an emotion that could be controlled and be utilized for more of a productive thing rather than a destructive type thing. So when you get in a fight, you might be creating more harm or putting yourself into more problems than being good. But if you channel that same type of anger energy into something else, you might be able to make it into a creative thing. So understanding emotion, it's a very broad thing, right? We have basic emotions. Then beyond emotions is that feeling words. So there's something called here emotional wheel or feeling words. And there's different ways that people break this down. This was one that I found on the internet that I sort of liked. There's no right one or wrong ones in terms of the way that people break it down. But like I said, different people break it down in different ways. So with this, it shows here, for example, looking at the center, these would be more of like the core emotions, right? Fear, anger, disgust, sad, happy, or surprise. But beyond that, you might say, all right, well, I'm feeling sad, but what about sad are you feeling? So you look into it a little bit further. Well, I'm feeling lonely. Why am I feeling lonely? It might be because I'm feeling abandoned. So it gives you an opportunity, once you start to look into that feeling word, to really understand what exactly is going on with you, as opposed to just saying, I'm feeling sad. So understanding that the feeling words helps you to tap into even deeper aspect of you, and being more, again, mindful of how you're really feeling gives you an opportunity to be able to control that emotion and be able to utilize that to your benefit, basically.
You know what I call that when I work with clients? Called peeling the onion. Peeling the onion of emotions and finding out those four core. You said they were anger, fear. What were those four core? Surprised,
Well,
joy.
there's 6 here. Different people utilize different things. So some people look at it as 6 emotions, 5 emotions, 7 emotions. So this one just breaks it down from 6 emotions. So
And from those 6, it breaks down into looks like 5 to 7, 8 more other layers of just
Yep.
assigning how you feel and where that feeling originated from: abandonment, fear, rejection, not good enough.
Yeah. So I'm going to use an example here, right? Fear and alienation, right? You might feel alienated, but you feel frightened. Similarly, isolated and alienated has an overlap to it, right? If you're alienated, at some point in time, you might be feeling lonely. But are you feeling lonely because of being sad, or are you feeling lonely and alienated because of the fear? So understanding that even emotions itself have degrees of overlap to it. So once we start tapping into that feeling aspect of it, we might start realizing something that is deeper than just what we think. So we might say, well, I'm alienated and I'm frightened, or you might say I'm alienated, but I'm sad, but it might not actually be that. It might be a completely opposite emotion that it's stemming from. So again, taking that opportunity to dig deeper gives you an opportunity to really understand what is that emotion that you're feeling and where it's stemming from.
And you know what's so cool about Dr. Radley, y'all? He's also not only a naturopath that gets to the root of the problem, but he's trained in acupuncture, and acupuncture gets to where the emotional blockage of energy is, and he opens up that pathway. So he has a very unique perspective of how pain or illness presents in the body attached to the emotion. Do you want to touch on that just a minute, since you're an acupuncturist and what they do, how you're different?
I'm going to touch on that in a little bit, but I'm going to ask you, this next question. Emotions, are they something positive or negative?
They can be both.
So anger, is it negative or positive?
Negative. Negative, low vibrational energy, very low energy. I kind of go the Taoism. You know how Taoism, anger is like 278 frequency, and you have every emotion and every organ and every disease that has the frequency. So anger to me is a very low vibrational, negative emotion that takes your energy out of your body.
All right. So the next part of our discussion today, after we're done with that, I'm going to ask you the same question again, right? Do you look at emotion as being positive or negative, right? So I want you to remember what your answer was there, right? So you just asked me about acupuncture. So oftentimes when I work with clients, just from naturopathic medicine and acupuncture as a whole, we look at things from a very holistic perspective. So I go through very detailed questions with patients. I ask about like any type of trauma history, things like relating to stress. So an individual might come in and say, well, I have headaches, but I asked about things like digestion. I asked about things like pain, musculoskeletal pain, different type of neurological pain. You might complain with headaches, but I would ask you about things like shortness of breath, heart palpitations, all those different things, right?
You ever ask if they live in an abusive, narcissistic environment where they're being emotionally sucked dry? That should be on your questionnaire. Or do you live with a
I don't
narcissist?
actually directly ask those questions, but I ask in terms of stress. And then once they answer the question of stress, I try to dig in a little bit deeper. A lot of it is really listening to the individual, what they say. And once they say certain things, you could pick up on certain key aspects of them. Or sometimes you would see the dynamics of the patient and their family member that come in with them. So sometimes it's important to see that and sort of ask the question, because you don't want to ask if a couple comes in, for example, and
Yeah.
you don't
Is your
want to be like,
husband a
is your husband a
narcissist?
narcissist and is he very abusive to you? That is just
Yeah.
going to be like, all right, I don't think this is a right fit. I'm leaving the office.
Right.
So a lot of it is really like understanding the time and the place and the situation and basically the environment in terms of how I ask questions. So I ask it more of like a generalized question, and then I would dig into it. So everybody's first answer when you ask, or the majority of people would say when you ask, it's like, how is stress for you? They'll be like, I don't have stress. I was like, nobody doesn't have stress.
Yeah,
Everybody
nobody
has
doesn't have
some
stress.
stress.
You have stress driving to work in the
Yep.
morning. Come on.
So I break it down for them then, and I would ask the next question and be like, well, do you mean that you could manage your stress? And then they'll be like, well, yes, I feel like I could manage it. And then they'll be like, well, there's certain things that I don't really feel. And then you dig further into understanding what exactly that stress is relating. So that's my approach of getting into that aspect of it with the patient rather than being direct. Because a lot of times, once you bring up things like mental health and emotional health, people automatically just put a wall up. They say, that's it.
Yeah.
I don't see the connection between my emotions and my knee pain. And just like we talked about, there's parts of the brain that correlates to pain and emotion. So there is an overlap within that aspect of it. So people don't see it from that aspect, but it's not until you start breaking it down that then they realize, well, oh, I know it makes sense. I did develop an emotional attachment to my pain. So that's why I do acupuncture. I could get off the table and I could walk out the door 10 times as fast as I came in, but then the patient in their mind says, emotion-wise, I have an attachment, so I'm missing something. I don't feel myself because I have developed that emotional bond to my pain. And it's difficult for people to break that habit until they realize that is what they're doing. So somebody can't break a habit unless they really know that it is a habit that they're doing.
You have to be brought to your awareness. I mean, like with me, there was so much that I wasn't even aware of, that I was doing unhealthy things, like what I eat, what I drink, if I move, do I meditate? You know, I used to just get up and get through the day to get, you know, I'm ex-pharma. I used to get up and go, okay, I've got 8 doctors to see, I've got to go to 2 pharmacies, I've got to see 4 hospitals. I didn't even think about my health, what I eat and my breathing and my hydrating. I never thought of it because I didn't even know it wasn't even in my awareness.
Yeah. And that's a big part of it. It's bringing people to that sense of awareness. Once you're aware of things, then it becomes easier for you to change it. So that's why, like, I did the workshop and I explained to people in that workshop that if we understand our emotions, then we could understand why certain things are popping up within our life. And it's not that every time, every single emotion is associated with a disease or a condition, or not every condition that an individual presents with has to have an emotional component to it. But if we understand that there is that potential for it, it might be able to help you heal faster, because you might have taken every pain medication that there is, right? And you
Yep.
never feel any relief from your pain because the emotion might be not a physical pain, but an emotional pain. So if you don't address the emotional component or the PTSD or the mental health aspect of it, then that pain is going to remain there for you as an individual because you're not dealing with the root of it. So
I have found that with clients I've worked with that do live with very non-empathetic, non-feeling, narcissistic type selfish people, the little empath that usually marries them winds up getting autoimmune or cancer because there is a imbalanced energy flow. One takes and just drinks and drinks and drinks and drinks with nothing in return. And then you wind up and you're like, why do I have autoimmune? Why is my thyroid and adrenal stressed? Oh, I live with someone I have to walk on eggshells and calls me fat and ugly and like calls me names and limits my, I mean, this is where the emotions and disease has to be connected. You have to get doctors to realize that you can't just get a pill to somebody and they'll be okay, because sometimes there is a root of emotions.
exactly. And recently I've been reading a book. I don't remember the title of the book off the top of my head right now, but it's by Dr. Gabor Mate. And he talks a lot about that, like how emotions and the way that we grew up has a connection to people develop things like autoimmune conditions, things like cancer, right? And understanding that where there is pattern to it, and science, sometimes to me, I look at science almost like a convenient thing, right? You see patterns within people, but you don't want to consider that as science. And then you want to do a scientific research and say, well, I don't see the connection as to why you say that everybody who has struggled with anger issues or suppressed anger or overexpressed anger develop something like breast cancer, right? I'm just using this one as an example, right?
Right.
There is overlap and correlations to it because you do see patterns. If you dig into people's history, you might see something. And because not everybody is always willing to dig into that aspect of it for themselves, they're not going to go to the doctor and say, oh, I have been in a very abusive relationship all my life, or I have always suppressed my anger because I live with a narcissistic husband or wife, right? No patient that just go into, or very few patients would come out and say those things. So understanding that sometimes we have to dig back into certain things. Sometimes we put up, like I say, when we go through trauma, we have to survive it, right? So we put up this wall between it, and then that becomes sort of like an automatic block. So we never make that connection to something that might have happened to us during childhood or in our younger days that is actually contributing to us. And it becomes part of our personality, and it becomes so used to being us that basically we just act out in certain ways. And people say, well, no, that's just personality. Not really. Yes and no, it is part of the personality, but that personality stem from, was that person actually born as an angry person, or did that person become an angry person because of their traumatic history? So understanding all of those things could help you connect back to why certain things might present and develop for individuals.
I was interviewing a young little business owner. It was really weird, Radley. I never do impromptu interviews, and something told me to ask her to be interviewed. And she was a domestic abuser survivor. And he controlled her money wise, called her names, and she thought there was something wrong with her and that she didn't even realize that he was an abuser narcissist. She really thought she was the problem, that she just wasn't doing things right, or she just didn't behave right. And I'm like, honey, you were under full control of an abusive man. She said, oh, I realize now. And she left and has opened her own business, but she thought it was her.
Yep. and it happens a lot more often than we realize. And it's just because sometimes we get so caught up in doing things that we don't realize where we sacrifice our own mindfulness, and we become that sort of go-to person. So we're an empath, and then we feel the pain of everybody else around us, but we don't realize when
Right.
that is taking a burden on us. So, or sometimes it might be that that individual might have grown up in an abusive home. So when she saw her mom and dad growing up, the relationship between her mom and dad, she might have identified as a kid and within her head and said to herself that my dad showed love to my mom every time he beat her, or when she controls him, or he controls her, that is what love is. And as a kid, when you grow up with that in your head as your survival mechanism, then when you grow older, you seek those things out, right? And you get to that point where it's like, I seek out an abusive relationship. I go from one
Yeah, because it's
abusive,
familiar. We call
yeah,
that ministry familiar spirits. It's comfortable because it's what we're accustomed to. It doesn't mean that it's right or it's healthy.
exactly. And I talk a little bit about that in my book too, in terms of the aspect of like comfort and trauma. We get comfortable with those traumas that it becomes part of our life. I talk about the cycle of abuse and how that cycle of trauma continues because of that reason. Like we feel comfortable with it because we don't recognize it as being something wrong. So we get to the point where it just continues with it, and we seek out that because that is what we grew up as an individual saying, that this is what love is. This is how love should be expressed. I beat my wife, or my wife beat me, and that is love, right? And
It's
because
a
of that,
it's twisted. It is a false love. It is abuse. And people think abuse is how they just demonstrate love. It's not, it's abuse.
yeah, and that's what makes it control. And until somebody along that cycle recognize it as being wrong, then they have that opportunity to break that cycle and then not create. Because you do see that, you do see family histories of where kids grow up in an abusive home and they either become the abuser or they seek out an abusive relationship, and they would just
Right.
jump from one abusive relationship to the next until they realize that I am not supposed to be abused, right? And then they recognize like, listen, me being abused is wrong, not because my mom or dad was abusive or they were abused means I have to continue being abused. Same thing with like a parent to child response, right? As a kid, you might have been physically abused, mentally abused, sexually abused, and you take that as part of what love is, right? Unfortunately, that is not what love is. It
Yeah, love
just
is not
becomes a
control. I
continued,
promise you.
yep. So that allows that continuous cycle to continue until somebody finds it within themselves to be able to say, listen, this is wrong and I'm breaking that pattern. And unfortunately, sometimes it takes very long for people to identify it. And sometimes, fortunately, it takes people quickly enough to be able to realize it. So cultural differences, all of those things help to play a part in those things and keep those things going. And unfortunately, until somebody recognizes the trauma, you can't really heal from it.
Right.
So jumping back into the 5 emotions according to traditional Chinese medicine, right? The emotion of anger is associated with the element of wood. The wood is associated with the organs of the liver and the gallbladder. Anger has an aspect of it where there's resentment as well as motivation, right? So think of some of the things that might get you angry. Things like social injustice gets you angry, right? There is an aspect of motivation that comes from that. So if we channel the anger of social injustices making me angry, I could convert that into motivation,
Positive.
right?
That's why I
So
became a pharma whistleblower. That's how I channel the anger of almost killing me, my own industry. And now I turn around and educate people and then plug them from that system.
yep. And that's where motivation has a connection to anger. Next is joy, right? Joy is associated with the element of fire. The heart and small intestines are the organs associated with fire. Joy has the component of love, hate, and frenzy. Frenzy in terms of there is an aspect of where people could be too happy, right? And we see people as being extremely happy, and then we consider them to be crazy, right?
We call that manic.
Yes. And
Manic.
are we right for calling that manic? Who am I to say, right? They might have actually be genuinely happy and really enjoying life, but to everybody and to society, because of all the things that we put up and all the boundaries and walls and edges and things that we put on, the way that we try to frame society and what society should be, we recognize that excessive joy as what would be manic or frenzy. So again, I'm not saying it's a right or a wrong thing, but understanding that joy does have an extreme to it on both sides, just like anger has an extreme where you could convert it into something good. Worry is associated with the element of earth, the stomach and spleen, organ system. And then there's empathy, sympathy, and planning. Grief and sadness is associated with the element of metal, the lung and large intestine, or the organs, or the Chinese meridians. And then there's the guilt, regret, and compassion associated with grief and sadness. Fear is associated with water, the kidney and the urinary bladder, as well as things like anxiety, panic, and caution. So just like we saw earlier, where there's overlap in emotions, anxiety could be correlated to worry. Anxiety could be correlated to anger. Anxiety could be correlated to grief. But there's also anxiety that is being correlated to fear. So even though you see me mention anxiety under fear here, it's not, anxiety doesn't mean it only has to stem from fear.
That's why fear attacks the adrenals so much. Fear really attacks that adrenal and kidney function.
So when you think of, again, where is the adrenal gland located? It's located pretty much above the kidney, very close to the kidney. So when you look at it from a traditional Chinese medicine perspective that has been there thousands of years ago, that even before they were doing things like anatomy and understanding the true anatomy, they understood that fear is connected with this, right? Fear is connected with the kidneys, but they may not have known that something like the adrenal gland is actually there. And then that's where you see those types of connection being played. So science, what is science is bringing to us now are things that these ancient types of medicine have seen. They've just seen it in a different pattern, and now science is slowly proving it. So I am very grateful that science is proving these things, but again, it's just unfortunate that it's taken us so long to recognize it. And yet they would still bash and say acupuncture doesn't work, mental health.
Hey, Radley, can you go back to the elemental chart and let me add something just on this one? It's so cool because in the Jitsu, we are taught that we are made of the 5 elements. We are made of water. We are made of the dirt. And so when you, as an acupuncturist, goes to those organs and that energy flow, we literally are made up of water, fire, earth, metal, and incorporated, as he said, he's so grateful that science is now justifying your body is made, God made our body of elements. We're living energy. And that's what's so beautiful about using acupuncture. It can restore energy, your chi, prana, living force back into homeostasis.
Exactly. So there is that connection. And like I said, I'm very happy that science is bringing a lot of things to the forefront now, but unfortunate that it's taken this long. And this is why I like the idea of promoting integrative health, because integrative health, there is a time and a place for pharmaceuticals. There's a time and a place for herbal medicine. There's a time and a place for diet and nutrition. Everyone's at a different phase in their life. So understanding that would make it important to why an integrative approach is more important than saying acupuncture is better than pharmaceuticals, or pharmaceuticals is better than this, or surgery is better than that. Understanding that there is a connection between everything and taking the whole person into consideration is important. And when we address things from an integrative and a holistic perspective, then we are actually really helping individuals healthcare wise. It's not just treating an illness or just suppressing a symptom, as the case might be.
Well, you get to
So
the root cause, and I love that about your book too, because you're using a tree and you have the branches and you have the below the roots. I'm sure you did that on purpose because you're a
I did,
master marketing genius,
I
but
did.
it really shows you are connected to everything.
Yeah. And I'm really grateful for the designer of that picture. It's actually one of my sergeants from the military. Um, when I told him that I wanted to publish the book and I wanted to design the cover, I asked him to design it. And he
I
took
just saw
aspects
the
of things.
elephant.
Yeah.
I
He,
just saw the elephant. What's the deal with the elephant? I just saw you, the blue man in the middle, the elephant, the tusk, the branches, and coming down here. That's cool because you're the elephant, the essence of the tree of the roots.
so part of why the elephant's there, it's because of what elephant stands for. Elephant stands for that persistency and being able to keep driving forward and moving forward. Elephants has that component of things like family. So when we understand the dynamics of how elephants work and what they stand for in various cultures, right? In
In the
traditional
memory,
Chinese, in
the
Asian cultures,
wisdom.
everything. There is a lot of things that elephants has that significance of loyalty, of strength, of perseverance, of pushing through. And when we struggle with PTSD, a big part of it really is us having to understand that sometimes we have to persist and perceive and keep going and keep going and be loyal to ourselves. A big part of it is being loyal to ourselves. I tell people a lot of times, you go to one therapist and then you say, oh, I didn't get help from this therapist, so I'm done with seeing. I don't think I could get help for my PTSD or my struggles. And understanding that sometimes it might take you 10 or 20 people before you get that right one to help you is important. I
The
might have
fear.
an approach to working with individuals with PTSD that might be helpful to you, Suzanne, for one aspect of your PTSD, but then there might be another aspect of your PTSD that everything that I do is not helpful, but you might go by another therapist who has something very similar and you might find significant improvement. So does that mean I am wrong and the other person's right? No, it means that aspect of what I was able to help you is what I am good at, but the other person or the other doctor or therapist might be very good at helping you with another aspect. So sometimes just understanding that aspect of it, that when it comes to healing branches, the reason it's healing branches as opposed to just healing trunk or healing branch, it's because there's a lot of things that are available for us to utilize to help us heal from our struggles and our trauma that we need sometimes to just seek it out. And understanding that there's different opportunities and different avenues to use gives us that opportunity to say, yes, seek it out, as opposed to saying, I tried medication, it didn't work for me, try something else. I tried therapy, it didn't work for me, try something else. I tried art therapy, there might be music therapy that might work for you, or writing therapy. You might be the individual. I'm going to use myself actually. I don't like talking. I could ramble on about topics like these, right? I could teach things, but tell me talk about my own personal emotion. I might be very hesitant to be open about certain things or share certain things that I have been through with you or with a doctor. But another individual could walk into the room and share every single thing. So I would struggle with the type of therapy that would involve talking because it would take me a long time to get to that, right? To be open or comfortable enough to talk about. But if I use something like writing, I like writing. So if I use something like writing, I might be able to get to the root of my trauma a lot faster in writing as opposed to talking, because that is what I gravitate toward. That is what I feel comfortable with. So understanding
I
those
write.
things are
I
always
write.
very
Yeah.
important. Yeah.
I do music, I write, I ground, I do essential oil, CBD. I'm very much into trying to just stay centered and present.
Mhm. So it's always important to understand that there's a lot of opportunities and a lot of avenues. And once we take that opportunity to seek it out, like the elephant, be persistent about it and push yourself through, you would be able to find that one branch that is worthwhile for you, right? So jumping back into emotional health, right?
Hey,
What could
give
be,
out a shout out to your, because I interrupted you. Give me the guy that designed this. Let's give him a shout out for his talent. What was his name again?
so his name is Sergeant Divine Quinones. I would put a link, and I would share a link if anyone's interested in seeing more of his artwork. He's actually also a great tattoo artist in New York. He's the one that actually has done tattoos for me, and he knew me on a personal level. So when we were designing the book, he took aspects of what he knew about me and helped me sort of bring this all together and make the design come out to what it was. So I'm definitely grateful for him being the one that designed. And I tell him that every time that I see him or I talk to him, that the design, every time we look at it, we could see different aspects, and we have a lot of mutual friends. And when we look at it, we could be like, all right, well, I see this, or I see that, or this stands out, or that stands out. And that's part of why that picture combines in such a way. It's because sometimes that might help you be able to draw to certain aspects
Yeah.
of your own trauma as well. So
Well, shout out to you, sir, because he is an
I shall
amazing
shout out to
graphic
him.
artist. So thank you for your talent, sir, up in New York.
And while we're on the shout outs, I want to also say a special shout out to Dr. Tertia Hamilton. She was the one who was my publisher for this book. She guided me a lot through it and helped me figure out how best to write it. And one of the biggest feedback that I get about the book is that it's written in a simple term that every individual, every common person could understand and relate to it. And I think because of her guidance, it was
So
why
she
I was
did
able
great
to
because
write
it flows.
that.
You want to
So
show the book? You want to give me a screen? Let me show it. It's very much easy to read. And I don't think I'm on the screen, but it's okay. But it's very easy to read. Like when I started reading it, it wasn't overwhelming, and it got straight to the point of the issue I was facing. It's like, oh, that made sense. Okay. It was very, as you said, just where everybody can understand it. It's not technical because you're a doctor. Everyday Joe Blow can read this and get something out of it. So I highly recommend this book.
thank you, Suzanne. And just like you said, with the book, and like I said, and the feedback that I've got, the idea is trying to make things simple so people could understand it. So understanding brings us back to what could be told from the emotion of anger. So I'm going to ask you this question, Suzanne. What do you think is something that anger could tell you about yourself? If you become angry, what might be the story behind it?
When I feel unsafe, I've learned when I get angry, it's my fear talking. That's
Okay.
when I feel like I have to protect myself, and I'm just like, oh, that makes me so angry. It's either abandonment or fear.
Okay. So to an extent, yes, fear contributes to it, but anger tells us what our boundaries we need to work on, right? So fear might be stemming because people are crossing our boundaries, but we become angry because they're also crossing our boundaries. So if both of us is in the store together, right? And physical boundary, you pushing your trolley, I'm pushing my trolley, and I cut you off, right? That is one example that came up in our workshop recently that someone used, that they get angry when people cut them off. It's a matter of cutting off your boundary, right? So anger helps us to understand what type of boundaries we might need to work on, be it physical boundary, mental, emotional, spiritual, sexual, whatever type of boundary it is. That might, when we experience anger, it might tell us that, listen, this is something that we might need to work on. We might need to be working on our boundary associated with whatever is creating that anger, and give us an opportunity to really understand and help ourselves channel that anger into something more constructive or positive. It also tells us what are things that we see as out of balance in our body or around us, right? It also tells us what are we passionate about. So going back to the aspect of motivation, right? Some of the things that get us angry, we see an injustice happening on television. It stirs up anger within us, right? We become angry and we want change. We wish we could fight and we could do something to change it. But anger is not a negative thing when it's doing that, right? Being angry because you see social injustice is not a negative thing. So when you understand that, this helps us identify things that we are passionate about. it gives us an opportunity to create positive change or create a positive impact in the areas around us. So anger could help us to compel us to change and grow as individuals and as a community. So the next emotional joy, what can be told from the emotional joy? What makes us feel fulfilled? It could tell us where we feel safe, connected, and loved. So when we feel safe, connected, and loved, it's easy for us to be happy. It's easy for us to enjoy that given moment and place and time. So also on the flip side, it could tell us whether we are overexpressing another emotion or suppressing another emotion because we don't get a chance to actually enjoy joy, right? When we suppress emotions, there are people who, well, oftentimes we see it, right? And we see it in the community of musicians and actors, right? Think of some of the ones who are very joyous and then they commit suicide. Or that person was always a happy-go-lucky person and they never showed any sign of sadness or grief, right?
They're like Robin Williams. You think
Yes.
funny man Robin Williams is like, oh my gosh, he killed himself?
Yes. So in your head, how does that make sense, right? How is it that he could always be this happy person and bring joy to everybody, but yet he committed suicide? You wouldn't commit suicide if you're a happy person, right? There's no reason to kill yourself if you're enjoying life. So beyond that, there is that aspect of understanding that, am I suppressing another emotion? Am I suppressing grief? Am I suppressing anger? Am I suppressing guilt? Am I suppressing something else or fear that is making me overexpress joy? And then it acts as a cover, but deep down inside, I'm actually not dealing with my emotions. So I use joy as a cover. But when I go behind closed doors, I'm struggling with grief. I'm struggling with anger. I'm struggling with
Or
my fear.
depression.
Yep, exactly. So
Depression, anxiety.
understanding that aspect of it, that when we tap into where we express joy, understanding, are we really enjoying our joy, or are we just using joy as a cover for other emotions?
Mm-hmm.
Then there's the emotional worry, right? When we worry, it might be able to tell us things that we might need to work on prioritizing, things that we need to face, confront, or deal with. When we start worrying, we worry about things that are there and persistently being a problem for us. So it might be something that we need to confront or actually just deal with. Or it might tell us, listen, it's time for us to slow down. We're overthinking, we overanalyzing every single thing, and we're worrying about everything. So we need to take an opportunity to slow down. Then there's
Excuse the creaky chair. Sorry about that. I had to adjust my back. Sorry about that, guys.
No problem, no problem.
We'll not be using this chair in the future.
The emotional grief, what could it tell us, right? Things that we may need to process the loss of. So sometimes we hold on to grief because we lost someone or we lost something that we haven't really taken the opportunity to process it. It gives us an opportunity to look within and identify sources of sadness, things that we hold on to, and things that we may need to let go of. It also gives us or directs us to things that we may honor or need to honor within our lives. So a lot of times, people struggle with grief because there's things like resentment, things of anger associated with grief, and we never really pay true honor to the people that we lost. And that's why sometimes people struggle with grief, because they feel like, if I grieve, I'm going to lose that person completely. It doesn't work that way. If you grieve, grief is not necessarily a negative thing. If we honor that person and we say, listen, I honor that time and that space that I shared with that individual that passed away, then by giving ourselves that opportunity to honor them, we could say, listen, I could hold on to all the lessons that they shared with us. But by honoring them, I could go through the process of grief and cry and say, listen, I lost this person and they're no longer physically here with me. But by putting that honor to them, it allows us to understand that all the lessons that they've taught us doesn't go down the drain or isn't burnt away when that individual is cremated or isn't buried when that individual is buried. So understanding that and understanding that sometimes that grief gives us an opportunity to figure out what we need to honor within our lives helps us to go through that process of grief as well.
I have found that grief is really just love with nowhere to go. When you're grieving, it's because you love them and you just
Mhm.
can't express that love, and it just turns into grief.
Yep, exactly. And then the emotion of fear. It's a little bit easier one to understand because when we get frightened, it's a matter of identifying safety versus danger. Am I in a safe place or am I in danger? So when we become frightened of a situation, we detect a threat. So now it's like, all right, what do we do to move away? And that's how we respond because of the emotion of fear. Where our work is, things that we may need to overcome to help us move forward and find our own inner willpower. And then by understanding what we fear, sometimes it could help us guide us into a direction of our higher purpose. So a lot of times we hear people talk about overcoming our fear gives us an opportunity to grow and become better, take that leap of faith, right? Part of it is we fear things that allows us to be restricted. When we keep holding on to fear, we basically restrict ourselves a lot. So understanding fear from that aspect as well gives us an opportunity to find that direction of doing things that could give us or get us to our higher purpose and really serving and helping individuals. So I might have a fear of public speaking, but doing something like this might give me an opportunity to teach people. That might be one of my higher purpose, being able to teach and educate, break things down to a simpler level. But had I said that I'm fearful of teaching people, then that opportunity for me to teach people would always remain there, and it would never happen because I live in fear. So understanding what that fear is telling me gives me an opportunity to overcome the fear and be able to utilize it for a better purpose, basically. So I'm going to ask you the question again, Suzanne. Is emotion a positive thing or is it a negative thing?
I think it's a positive thing.
So yes or no, it shouldn't be positive or negative. It should be situational because there are times that the emotion can be negative as well as positive. So again, if you're angry at a person, it might be a negative thing in one way, but it could also be a positive thing in one way. So you have to understand emotion has a positive aspect to it, but also a negative aspect. It's just basically how we do it. Because if we get angry and we punch somebody, that is negative. But if we get angry at somebody and we take that opportunity to channel that energy and say, let me go exercise, let me go do something, let me paint, let me do this. We convert that negative energy into something positive and creative. So it's important to not necessarily look at whether an emotion is positive or negative. I know I kind of led you into answering whether it's positive or negative,
Right,
but the
right.
reason for that is because that's how we think of emotions. We think of emotion as whether it should be positive or negative.
Right.
And once we start breaking away from that habit of looking at it as a positive emotion or a negative emotion and really understanding behind the story, behind the emotion, then we are really able to move on and really be able to be emotionally healthy and be able to be emotionally well, basically. So
And sadly, with post-traumatic stress, you get stuck in a negative emotion. That's what you get on the trauma loop.
Yep.
And you just can't see any hope, and it's just trauma, 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 and you aren't aware of anything else but the trauma loop.
Exactly. So how do we deal with our emotions? We took an opportunity to understand emotion from neurotransmitter, understand emotions from how it plays a part in the limbic system. We broke it down according to the 5 elements of TCM. We took an opportunity to understand what are some of the potential triggers or understanding what causes us to evoke certain emotions. So how do we deal with our emotions? It's the next question, right? First of all, we have to understand our emotion, understand what we are feeling and where we are feeling it. So reflect back onto the map. Where do we feel certain emotions within our body? When we become angry, where are we feeling it? Are we feeling it in our hands? Are we feeling it in our toes? Are we feeling that stress on our shoulders? And that gives us an opportunity to be able to heal and move on from it. If we keep on holding tension and pain in our shoulder every time we get angry, then we might end up with actual pain in our shoulder that is stemming from our emotion of anger. So understanding that would help you heal that I don't need to put an acupuncture needle in your shoulder to make you feel better. If we work on the emotion of anger itself, that would also help you relax those muscles, because now instead of saying, all right, I'm angry, I'm feeling that tension, I agree that I am angry, I feel it in my shoulders, No, let me do something to channel that energy and actually allow that emotion and energy to relax within me. So again, understanding what we are feeling and where we're feeling it, and understanding the emotion itself gives us that opportunity to really deal with our emotion. So identify it and label it for what it is. I am feeling angry. Don't say I don't get angry, or I don't get sad, or I don't get frightened. Be brave enough to say basically, yes, I am angry. This is anger, what I am feeling, right? Then accept the emotion. I accept that I am angry. Nothing's wrong with being angry, right? And then remember that emotion is not meant to be permanent. It's a temporary thing. So once we understand that, it gives us an opportunity to say we don't need to be stuck in being angry. We don't need to be stuck in being frightful. We don't need to be stuck in being sad. If we take that opportunity to channel that energy into something else, then it gives us an opportunity to really validate that emotion and move on from that emotion. And then again, understand the story behind the emotion. What triggered that emotion in me in the first place? And then give yourself an opportunity or a chance to really express that emotion. And that's basically how we could deal with our emotions. So how can we express our emotion, right? Sorry, just give me 1 second.
Oh, you're fine. I love your graphics too. I love the energy signatures and the background of the blue and the green. It's very inviting. Nice work. I love it.
Thank you. I'm happy that you caught on to that aspect of it.
I did. I'm a very detailed person. You know, I'm an empath, so I'm gonna see every detail. Oh, this elephant jumped out at me when I looked at this book. I'd never really looked at the cover. I went, "Oh my gosh, that's an elephant in the trunk and a man holding his tusk."
Yeah. So again, how can we express our emotions? So we first of all, we have to express it by accepting it and validating it, right? Like I said in the slide before, if we accept the emotion of anger and we validate that we are feeling angry, that's the only way that we could really express anger. If we say we're not angry, basically what we're trying to do to ourselves is suppress it. And again, suppressing it is not the healthy option. So understand the emotion and understand the situation that you're in. Allow yourself or oneself to be in control so that you could respond versus react. Remember earlier you mentioned the idea of reacting versus responding. Responding is a control thing. Reacting is an automatic response, basically. Well, an automatic.
Yeah, if I get angry, if you trigger me and I feel unsafe, I feel so bad, but I get very, I mean, like I'm very much in your face, like back up, step away from me. And people don't realize it. I'm like, look, I'm triggered. You're really making me feel uncomfortable. And I'm very vocal. I get way up here talking. I'm like, oh gosh, I'm triggered.
Yeah. And then find creative means to channel your energy of emotion. So understand that emotion is basically associated with energy, right? So if we could channel that energy into something else, then it gives us an opportunity to express that emotion. So if you're angry, instead of getting up into someone's face, you could talk about it, and you have an opportunity to control it by talking about it. So you talk about the anger as opposed to reacting to the anger, where you get up into the person's face, you punch them, you say something out of uncontrolled. So you say something that might turn out to be negative. You make a very bad comment to that person that might be hurtful to you, or might be something that you have to resent later on for saying. So channeling that energy into talking, writing, coloring, drawing, painting, art, music, exercise. Basically, finding a creative mean to put that energy into it is what you could do it, and how you could express that energy. Understanding that, again, energy is an emotion. I mean, emotion is an energy. So channeling it is what is important. Not every time you feel sad, you need to write. Not every time you feel sad, you need to color or draw or paint. There are different ways or different avenues that you might be able to do it. And these ways of channeling certain emotions, sometimes it's more so associated with if it's taken long to deal with. So going back to something like grief, if you crying is a form of expressing grief, right? If you cry and then as soon as you cry in a funeral and you walk away and you stop crying, you don't feel that sense of grief. You don't continue feeling that emotional grief, then you don't need to go through and say, well, I need to channel that energy of grief because I just cried. You're able to overcome the emotion. You're able to get past that emotion and be able to go back into your normal routine life. That is what you want. You want to be able to break out of an emotion and go back into your normal routine. Be able to continue with every day and not dwell on a certain event or aspect that is restricting you as opposed to allowing you to move on. So that is when you would need to sort of become using these type of technique of where you really want to create something out of that emotion, basically. So some of the key takeaways that I wanted for individuals to have from this type of presentation, right? It's emotions and feelings could be single or mixed. Like I said, there could be a combination of anger and fear. There could be a combination of anger and grief that is presenting itself together, or it could act as an individual isolated emotion. So understanding that is important. Understand how emotion present for you as an individual and allow yourself to control the emotion so that the emotion doesn't control you. So again, the emotion controlling you is anger is one of those easier things to let it control you. You say something out of anger and then you later look back at it and will be like, well, I'm sorry that I said that. I didn't really mean that. That was allowing anger to control you as opposed to you controlling anger. Had it been the other way and you control the emotion, you might have said, listen, I'm upset with what you did, or I'm upset with what you said, and let's just deal with it in a more constructive or more productive way. And in that way, you actually control your emotion. You still validated that you were angry. You still validated that the emotion came up, but you were in control as opposed to the emotion being controlled, and it just becomes an autopilot type reaction. Understand the story behind your emotion. We talked a little bit about it. Every emotion has a story behind it. What is your story when that emotion pops up for you as an individual? And then avoid using one emotion to overshadow another or to suppress another. So sometimes you see people use anger to suppress grief or anger to suppress fear, right? Understanding where one emotion can do that and just avoiding yourself doing it is important when it comes to emotional health and well-being. Emotional health is just one part of health. So take care of your whole health. If you're not sleeping well, if you're not eating well, if you're not exercising, the likelihood of having good emotional health will not be there, because you could see from the neurotransmitters that we talked about earlier, getting sunlight and doing exercise gives you an opportunity to get certain neurotransmitters produced. And that is the same thing that might make you feel happy. So understanding that it's a whole health approach. It's a holistic approach to it. Don't just take emotional health as one thing. It's a combination of things, and don't try to isolate it. So like I said, sometimes emotion might contribute to a disease or the development of a disease, but it might not be the isolated thing. When we feel sad, we might eat a certain way, right? We might choose to eat all unhealthy foods when we feel sad or when we feel angry or when we feel stressed out. So again, emotions connect to diet. We're eating bad, the emotions playing into it. So there's a combination of it. So understand that they all play a part with each other. When we don't eat properly, we don't absorb the proper nutrients. The way that our neurotransmitters are produced, it would also be affected. So then we might end up being not able to express a certain emotion or not be able to feel happy because we don't eat the proper nutrients to support that type of well-being. A lot of times we see things like vitamin D, and you hear a lot of studies coming out now with vitamin D being associated with depression, right? People who are lower in vitamin D tend to have a higher risk of developing depression or struggling with things like post-traumatic stress disorder. So understanding that is important, because diet does play a part in emotion. They go both ways. If you're not eating properly, you could contribute it. If you don't have proper emotional health, you could contribute by eating the wrong way, and then that would further exacerbate a certain situation. And then understand the positive and the negative aspect of your emotion. Like I said, you shouldn't say an emotion is positive or negative. They have both sides to it. But taking that opportunity to understand that is there, there is a positive and negative aspect of it. And then take into account the time, the place, and the situation for each. And then that will help you to really channel where you want to be, or what do you have to do, right? So I use the example of if someone's in a war zone, when I did the workshop the other day, talking about fear, right? Fear teaches us certain things. But if you're frightened and you're in the middle of a war zone and someone's shooting at you and you get frightened and you don't respond and say, let me understand that I'm frightened and I need to run or get to cover, then you're putting yourself in more harm by saying, well, I'm frightened and I'm just going to freeze, right? So understanding, yes, you have to understand that fear in that point is a negative thing. And I need to change it from being a negative thing and run or find cover, as the case might be. So understanding those things is important. Yes, there's a negative aspect, but there's also the positive aspect to it. What could I do with the fears that is there? What could I do with anger? I am angered because of social injustices. Channel that into motivation. Help me create a change. Help me educate somebody about these injustices that might be going on around us. So taking that opportunity to channel it, positive or negative, is important. So again, I want to say thank you, Suzanne, very much for having me. I am big on quotes, and this was one quote that I shared with the individuals during our workshop. You can only give what you have physically, mentally, emotionally, etc. So focus on growing what you want to give. So especially when it comes to emotion, if we're always that angry person, if we continue dwelling on anger, all we could give is anger. If we focus on understanding and growing and balancing emotions, then and only then we could actually truly share happiness, truly share joy with other people. So understanding that we could only give what we have, right? Or what we grow, or what we sow, as the case might be, then we could understand that having that balance between our emotions will always be important. So a picture here of Disney Pixar's Inside Out. The reason I have this picture here is that even though this is a cartoon and it's geared towards kids, it's one of, I would say, one of Disney's greatest thing that they did, right?
It's brilliantly written. It is
Yes.
so down to like the science of each emotion and each adverse event or each core memory and how it develops when you're in adulthood is the core memory of the little girl. Brilliantly written.
Exactly. So I would recommend it to everyone, whether you're 100 years old or you have kids, or it's a kids, that it's a great movie to watch. It's a great cartoon to watch because of how well written it is and how simple it breaks down emotion and gives us an opportunity to understand why it is important to balance emotions, as opposed to say, or suppress anger, or suppress grief, or suppress this, or suppress that. It takes emotions from different from the TCM approach, but it's important just to understand that aspect of it, how all of them are connected in one way or the other. You can't just isolate emotions to be one thing or the other. There is a connection and there is an overlap to every single one of them. So like I said, take an opportunity for anyone listening to this to look at that, and you'll get a deeper understanding of emotions just from watching this. And I'm happy to hear that there's actually a part 2 of this coming out soon. So someone shared that with me during the workshop as well, that there's a part 2 of this movie coming out. So I'm definitely looking forward to that. So as we end,
all right,
I
Dr.
just
Radley,
wanted
this is, I'm sorry, go ahead. I couldn't hear you. The phone went out there for a minute. So I said, I can't hear you. Wait, what were you saying?
just
You
wanted
recommend
to
everybody going and
share
see
I want to recommend everyone to share and to watch this movie, but I also wanted to share with everyone my contact information as well. On
Yes.
Facebook and Instagram, my pages are Universal Tree Health Clinic. My email is universaltree8c@gmail.com. The website for my book that we talked about is www.trauma2ptsd.com. My website is www. Dr. Dr. Radley Ramdhan.com. So DrRadleyRamdhan.com. My Discord is tiny url.com/Dr. Radley Trauma Healing. And then I have my YouTube channel. It's Dr. Radley Ramdhan. So take the opportunity to subscribe to the channel. You could see some of the videos I post. I also share these podcasts that I do with Suzanne as well on my YouTube channel. So there's always the link to subscribe to her channel as well, because even though I share what I did with her, she has a lot of other great presenters that I've heard and I've listened to, and even her herself has great things that she's presented on her channel as well. So follow her and subscribe to her as well, even though I'm
Thank
just
you.
on here sharing my information. So again, thank you very much, Suzanne, for this opportunity. And like I said, I'm always grateful for the opportunity to teach, and always grateful for the opportunity to work with you as well.
Yes, it's a wonderful relationship because we really truly do see the naturopathic approach to getting to the root cause, getting those emotions, understanding how they do interact in the body, and you can heal one bite, one thought, one prayer at a time. Eden's Living TV 2.0. Y'all stay tuned. Season 2 coming up. WYBU, Channel 16, and Atlanta, Channel 57. Thank you, Dr. Radley. You're always welcome here at Eden's Living TV.
Thank you, Suzanne.